Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Light and Shadow podcast. I am Gray, your spiritual mentor and guide, and today we are exploring something ancient, profound, and deeply transformative: the 3 levels of alchemical consciousness. Now, when most people hear alchemy, they think of medieval wizards trying to turn lead into gold in a dark laboratory. But that was never what alchemy was really about. Alchemy was always about transformation, not of metals, but of consciousness. The lead wasn't literal lead. The gold wasn't literal gold. The entire alchemical process was a map, a precise, detailed map of how consciousness evolves from its most dense, unconscious state into its most refined, awakened state. And the ancients encoded this map into 3 distinct levels, 3 stages of consciousness evolution. Each one represents a completely different way of experiencing reality. A different relationship with yourself, with others, with the divine, and with the creative power of the universe. Today we are going to walk through each level together. The terrestrial consciousness is where most of humanity currently lives. The lunar consciousness is the transitional awakening state. And the solar consciousness is the fully awakened, unified state. And here's what I want you to understand before we begin. These are not just historical categories. These are living states of consciousness that exist right now. You may have touched lunar or even solar consciousness in moments of deep meditation, profound love, or spiritual awakening, without knowing what you were experiencing. This isn't linear either. You don't permanently graduate from one to the next. Consciousness moves fluidly. You might spend most of your day in terrestrial consciousness and have a flash of solar consciousness during meditation. The goal isn't to permanently escape one level. It is to understand where you are, recognize the invitations to evolve, and begin consciously shifting your frequency. So let's begin. Before we dive into the 3 levels, let's understand the alchemical framework itself. Alchemy originated in ancient Egypt and Greece, flourished in Islamic civilization, and passed through medieval Europe in coded symbolic form. It was deliberately obscured to protect its teachings from those who would misuse or destroy them. The outer layer, turning lead into gold, was the exoteric teaching. The public story, the cover. The inner layer is the transforming consciousness from dense ignorance into radiant awareness. Was the esoteric teaching, the real work, the sacred path. Alchemists didn't hide behind symbolism out of vanity. They hid because consciousness technology was dangerous in the hands of those who would use it for power and control. So they encoded the teaching into mythology, art, and seemingly nonsensical instructions that only made sense to those who had the spiritual foundation to decode them. Traditional alchemy describes 3 primary stages of the great work. The nigredo, which is the blackening, which is this dissolution, breaking down the old, the ego shattering, everything you thought you knew crumbling. The albedo, the whitening, which is the purification, washing away, separation of what's essential from what is not, the soul clarifying. And the rubedo, the reddening, which is the integration, the union of opposites, the marriage of soul and spirit, the creation of gold, which is not material gold, but awakened consciousness. These 3 stages map beautifully onto our 3 levels of consciousness. The terrestrial, which is before and during the nigredo, the unconscious identified with the ego operating in the dark. The lunar, which is the albedo, the illumination between stages, the moonlit path of purification and awakening. And the solar, which is the rubedo, the full radiance, the integration, the gold. So let's walk each one. Level 1, which is terrestrial consciousness. Terrestrial consciousness is the densest level of a human awareness. It is earthbound, survival-focused, ego-identified, and fundamentally disconnected from higher reality. When we say terrestrial, we mean consciousness that is grounded entirely in the material world. Your identity, your worth, your reality, all defined by what you can see, touch, measure, and possess. This is not a judgment. This is where most of a humanity currently lives, and it is a necessary starting point. You cannot ascend without first understanding the ground you are standing on. In terrestrial consciousness, you are your ego, your name, your roles, your achievements, your image. These are not things you have, they are things you believe you are. When someone criticizes you, it feels like an attack on your existence. When you fail, it feels like you are a failure. Not that you experienced failure. There is no space between you and your identity. Everything is filtered through the lens of survival. Physical survival, but also emotional survival. You need to be safe, accepted, valued, loved. Fear is a dominant emotion because the ego is constantly scanning for threats to its existence. Your sense of worth comes entirely from outside yourself. You need others to confirm you're enough. You need achievements to prove your value. You need possessions to demonstrate your success. Without external validation, terrestrial consciousness collapses into worthlessness and depression. Reality is seen as fixed, separate, and divided. Black and white, God and evil, us and them. You are separated from others, separate from nature, separate from the divine. Time is seen as linear, past, present, future, in a straight line. There is no sense of eternity, no experience of timelessness, no awareness of dimensions beyond the physical. Terrestrial consciousness is entirely reactive. Something happens, you react. Something triggers you, you respond automatically. There is no space between stimulus and response because there is no observer watching the process. You don't choose your responses, you are your reactions. Imagine someone living entirely in terrestrial consciousness. So they wake up anxious about the day ahead, what they have to accomplish, what people think of them, whether they are successful enough. They scroll social media, comparing themselves to others, feeling inadequate or temporarily superior depending on what they see. They go to work, and their worth is entirely tied to their performance and their boss's perception of them. They come home, and their relationship dynamics are about control, validation, and survival. Do you love me enough? Am I secure? They consume constantly food, entertainment, possessions, trying to fill an emptiness they cannot name. They fear death with absolute terror because in terrestrial consciousness, the body is everything. When the body dies, you die. That's the belief. Terrestrial consciousness generates the greatest suffering because it operates from the deepest illusion, which is the separation. When you believe you are separate from everything, from others, from nature, from the divine, from your own deeper self, you are in constant war. War with yourself, with others, and with life. This is where addiction lives, where depression lives, where toxic relationships live, where greed lives, where violence lives. Not because people are evil, but because they are operating from the deepest level of unconsciousness, believing they are alone in a hostile universe, doing whatever they can to survive and feel momentarily okay. Terrestrial consciousness doesn't end peacefully. It ends through crisis. Something has to crack the ego so hard that the illusion of separation shatters. And this might be a devastating loss, a near-death experience, a profound illness, a complete failure, love so deep it dissolves your boundaries, or a mystical experience that arrives uninvited. The crack is painful, but it's the only way light gets in. This is nigredo, the blackening, the dissolution of everything you thought you were. It feels like death because, in a sense, it is. The death of the unconscious self. And through that death, something in you begins to emerge. Now, level 2, which is the lunar consciousness. The lunar consciousness is a transitional state, the moonlit path between unconsciousness, terrestrial awareness, and fully awakened solar consciousness. The moon doesn't generate its own light. It reflects the light of the sun. Lunar consciousness is the stage where you begin to perceive divine light, but you are perceiving it as a reflection, not yet as direct experience. You're seeing truth, but through a mirror. You're experiencing glimpses of something vast, but you cannot yet sustain it. This is the stage of awakening, not enlightenment. The stage of seeking, not finding, of questions, not answers, of transformation progress. So the awakening, where something has cracked open, you can no longer unsee what you now see. The old way of being, purely ego-identified, survival-driven, no longer satisfies. You start asking deeper questions. Who am I really? Why am I suffering? Is there more to life than this? What is consciousness? Where does this feeling of emptiness come from? The seeking begins in earnest. Books, teachers, practices, experiences. You're drawn to anything that might illuminate the truth you are beginning to see. And you are beginning to sense. And then for the first time, you develop metacognition. I have talked about it in a previous episode. The ability to watch yourself think, feel, and react. There is now a gap between stimulus and response, a witness. You can observe your ego without being completely consumed by it. You can catch yourself in old patterns. You can notice, I am doing the thing again. I am believing that story again. The observer is revolutionary. It is the first doorway to freedom. You're still experiencing duality, the light and the shadow, good and bad, self and the other. But now you are aware of the duality. You can see it operating. You can see the polarities and begin to understand that they are not separate. They are aspects of one whole. This is where spiritual bypassing becomes a major danger. You might intellectually understand oneness, but emotionally still be deeply wounded. You might use spiritual concepts to avoid genuine healing. So this is the albedo, the whitening. The soul begins to clarify. Old beliefs, old wounds, old patterns are surfacing to be seen, felt, and released. This process is not comfortable. It requires a genuine confrontation with your shadow. The parts of yourself you have denied, rejected, and suppressed. Lunar consciousness is not peaceful. It is the most intense stage of transformation because everything must be examined. Everything must be felt. Everything that is not aligned with truth must be released. As the ego loosens its grip, you become more sensitive to everything. Other people's energy, subtle guidance, the beauty of nature, the pain of the world. This sensitivity is both a gift and a burden. You may feel overwhelmed, ungrounded, anxious. The old coping mechanisms, which is substances or distractions, numbing, no longer work the way they did. You're too awake for them. In lunar consciousness, you begin to experience flashes of something beyond the ordinary. Moments of profound peace during meditation. Sudden knowing. Synchronicities that cannot be explained. A feeling of being held by something vast and loving. But these are glimpses. They come and go. You cannot sustain them. You reach for them and they dissolve. This is the nature of reflected light. It flickers. So this is an example for someone in lunar consciousness. They have started meditating, journaling, doing inner work. They're beginning to question everything they were taught. They have days of profound peace followed by days of deep anxiety. The oscillation feels maddening. They're releasing toxic relationships, but new healthy ones haven't fully arrived yet. There's a lonely in between. They're developing boundaries for the first time and feeling the guilt and discomfort that comes with it. They're sensing patterns in themselves that horrify them. The shadow work is painful but necessary. They have spiritual experiences that blow them open, followed by periods of doubt, where they wonder if they are imagining it all. They are becoming who they truly are. But who they truly are is still being revealed. The greatest danger of lunar consciousness is spiritual bypassing and premature identification. Bypassing is using spiritual concepts, practices, and ideas to avoid a genuine emotional healing. You might say, I have transcended that. I don't need to feel that anymore. But the wound is still there, buried deeper. The premature identification is believing you are enlightened because you have had peak experiences or intellectual understanding. I know. I am one with everything. But you still rage at traffic, still seek validation, still fear death. Lunar consciousness requires patience and humility. You are on the path, but you have not arrived. The moon is beautiful, but it's not the sun. The transition from lunar to solar happens when you stop seeking and you start being. When the observer dissolves back into awareness, not as a separate watcher, but as consciousness itself watching through you. When the glimpses become sustained experience, when the purification is complete enough that the light can shine through without obstruction, when you stop trying to achieve enlightenment and simply recognize what has always been there. This is not a moment. It is a gradual setting, like sediment in water, clearing until the water becomes transparent. Now, the third level, which is the solar consciousness. Solar consciousness is the fullest expression of awakened awareness. When the moon reflects light, the sun generates it. Solar consciousness is not receiving truth from outside. It is truth expressing itself through a human form. This is rubedo, the reddening, the integration, the union of all opposites, the creation of the philosopher's stone, which in alchemical terms is not a literal stone but consciousness that has completed its transformation. Again, what are the characteristics? You do have identity beyond ego. In solar consciousness, the ego still functions. You still have a name, still interact with the world, still have preferences and a personality, but you are no longer identified with it. You know yourself as consciousness first, human form second. The ego is a tool you use, not a cage you are trapped in. When criticism comes, it doesn't touch the core of who you are. When failure comes, it doesn't define you. When praise comes, it doesn't inflate you. You are settled in something that no external event can disturb. The illusion of separation has dissolved. You experience yourself as connected to everything, not as a concept, but as direct, lived reality. When you look at another person, you don't see other. You see consciousness wearing a different costume. When you look at nature, you don't see outside yourself. You see yourself expressing in infinite forms. This is not a belief. It is perception. The way you see the world has fundamentally changed in that stage. Solar consciousness lives in the eternal now. The past exists as memory, but doesn't pull you. And the future exists as possibility, but doesn't create anxiety. You are here, fully here, present, alive, each moment complete in itself. This presence isn't achieved through practice anymore. It is your nature. Practice was the training. Solar consciousness is the graduation. In terrestrial consciousness, love is conditional, earned through behavior, withdrawn through disappointment. In lunar consciousness, love is expanding but still mixed with fear and attachment. In solar consciousness, love is the ground you stand on. Not romantic love specifically, though that can be included, but a vast, unconditional, all-encompassing love for existence itself. The love is not sentimental. It is not everything is perfect and beautiful. It is a love that can witness suffering and darkness without turning away, that can hold the full spectrum of a human experience without judgment. Remember the E equal MC squared in our previous episodes? Remember consciousness collapsing the quantum field into reality? In solar consciousness, this creative power is fully conscious and fully active. You understand that your awareness directly shapes your reality, and you wield that understanding with wisdom, responsibility, and alignment with the highest good. You don't manifest from ego, like, I want this for myself. You create from alignment. What is being called through me? What wants to be expressed through this vessel? The difference is everything. Solar consciousness is not the absence of darkness. It is the integration of light and shadow into wholeness. You have been through Nigredo. You have faced your shadow completely. You have been through Albedo. You have purified and clarified. Now in Rubedo, you hold everything. Light and the dark, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, heaven and earth. Nothing is excluded. Nothing is rejected. Everything is seen, understood, and integrated into the whole. This is why solar consciousness is also called the marriage of opposites, the sacred union within. In terrestrial consciousness, death is the ultimate terror. In lunar consciousness, death becomes a philosophical inquiry. What happens after? Is consciousness eternal? In solar consciousness, death is understood as a transition, not an ending. You know, not believe, but know that consciousness is eternal. The body dies. You do not. This knowing brings a profound freedom. You are no longer enslaved by the fear of annihilation. You can live fully, take risks, love deeply, create boldly, because nothing can ultimately destroy what you are. Someone in solar consciousness, as an example, they move through their day with an underlying peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Things go wrong, and they respond, not react, with wisdom. They love deeply without losing themselves. They set boundaries, not from fear, but from clarity about what serves the highest good. They create. For example, art or a business or teaching or healing, not from ego ambition, but from genuine inspiration flowing through them. They can sit with another person's pain without being consumed by it, offering presence that heals simply by being there. They laugh easily, play freely, and hold life with a lightness that comes from knowing the depth beneath the surface. They face challenges not as threats, but as invitations, opportunities for consciousness to evolve further. They don't need to convince anyone of anything. They don't need to prove their awakening. The light speaks for itself. Solar consciousness is not perfection. It is not the absence of difficulty. It is not flowing above the world in blissful detachment. It's being fully in the world, fully human, fully feeling, fully engaged, while simultaneously knowing yourself as something infinite. You still cry. You still get angry sometimes. You still have preferences and experiences and a human life to navigate. The difference is you know who you are beneath all of it. And that knowing changes everything about how you experience being alive. One of the hallmarks of solar consciousness is that it naturally moves towards service, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of overflow. When you are filled with light, it spills out. When you experience unity with all beings, their suffering becomes your concern. Not in an abstract way, but personally. Solar consciousness tends to become a teacher, a healer, a creator, a guide, not because they sowed these roles, but because the light naturally radiates and others are drawn to it. This is the alchemy complete. Lead has become gold, not through force, but through transformation. The same substance, refined into its highest expression. So before we close, let me address something important. The movement between these levels is not linear. You might have moments of solar consciousness while spending most of your day in terrestrial or lunar. You might regress, experience a period of awakening, and then fall back into old patterns for months or years before rising again. This is normal. This is how consciousness evolves, not in a straight line, but in a spiral, returning to the same lessons at deeper and deeper levels until they are truly integrated. Terrestrial to lunar happens through crisis, awakening, or a crack in the ego that lets light through. It's rarely gentle. It's usually painful enough that the old way becomes unbearable. The lunar to solar happens through sustained practice, deep purification, and ultimately a letting go. So profound that you stop trying to become awakened and simply recognize what you already are. Now, what accelerates the journey? is a genuine inner work. Not just reading and thinking, but feeling, healing, confronting your shadow, doing the uncomfortable work, and releasing the need to control, to know, to have it figured out. And in all its forms, love dissolves ego faster than any other force. Also, consistent practice of being here now. And being as well in the presence of others who are on the path, who can reflect the truth back to you. Meditation, silence, the practice of meeting yourself without distraction. Now, what slows or blocks the journey is, again, spiritual bypassing, using spirituality to avoid genuine healing. Or ego inflation, believing you are more awakened than you are, using spiritual identity as another form of ego, or making spirituality another thing to achieve rather than a way of being. What slows it down as well is fear of change, of losing your identity, of the unknown, fear of the future, as well as isolation, trying to do this alone without guidance or community. Wherever you are on this spectrum right now, whether you are deep in terrestrial consciousness, navigating the lunar path, or catching glimpses of solar awareness, you are exactly where you need to be. The alchemy is happening. It has always been happening. The question is simply whether you are doing it consciously or unconsciously. And here's the question I want you to sit with. If you could see your own consciousness as clearly as you can see other people's, where would you honestly say you are? And more importantly, what are you willing to do to evolve? Alchemy was never about turning lead into gold. It was about the transformation of consciousness from its densest, most unconscious state into its most radiant, awakened expression. Terrestrial consciousness is where most of humanity lives. Ego-identified, survival-driven, operating from separation and fear, dense, heavy, suffering. Lunar consciousness is the awakening, painful, beautiful, confusing, but necessary. The stage where you begin to see, begin to question, begin to purify. Reflected light on the path. Solar consciousness is the completion. Integrated, unified, present, free. The light itself, shining through a human form. The gold the alchemists were always seeking. You are capable of this transformation. Not someday. Not if you are special enough or spiritual enough or good enough. Now. In this lifetime, in this body. The same consciousness that created universes, that built pyramids, that encoded wisdom into ancient myths. That consciousness is what you are. It's just been covered by layers of conditioning, fear, and forgetting. The alchemy is a process of uncovering, layer by layer, level by level. From terrestrial to lunar to solar, from lead to gold, from unconsciousness to awakened, from separate to unified, from afraid to free. The great work isn't out there. It is in here. It is you. It has always been you. When are you going to begin? So if you're ready for guidance on this alchemical journey, if you want support in moving through these levels of consciousness with clarity and intention, I'm here to walk with you. The gold is within you. It always has been. Until next time.